thank you for spending time today with us, and also to the panelists for taking time for this. This is a passion project for me. I've been talking about this with the panelists for quite a while, and thrilled with the panelists we've got for you guys. You heard us talking about the fact that we love editing. We think it's where the magic happens. I think there's a lot out there about writing and craft in the sense of creating the draft, and that's great because that's the basis of what your craft is, this creative pursuit. But there's a lot less about editing. And I was joking recently in a newsletter that I sent to my subscribers that editing is kind of like sex. You know how you do it, and anyone you may have done it with directly, but it's hard to know how anybody else might be doing it and if you're doing it as well as you could. So we're going to offer you, it's an opaque process unless you have been a part of it. A lot of times you don't know exactly how to go about it. And so I don't think there's rules. I'm not a big fan of dogma, but what we're going to do is offer you, there's decades of collective experience on this panel, and we're going to offer you what we have gleaned from probably thousands of manuscripts among the five of us that you can use to kickstart your editing and revision process. I talk about those separately. I'm not sure all the editors do, but really quickly, just to let you know how I'm differentiating those. Editing, you can think of as assessing, and revising you can think of as addressing. So basically, editing is how to find the things in your manuscript that might not be as strong and effective as they could be. Revising is how to fix them, how to make those things better and shore up your manuscript and make it as strong as it can be. Editing is sort of like, to me, writing, as important as that is to create the raw material to work with. The reason I think that editing is the magic part is writing is this purely creative thing. It's kind of like hewing this rough human shape out of marble, if you're talking about sculpting as an analogy. But editing is where you chisel and sharpen and hone it into the David. It's really where you get to get your vision onto the page and make it as deep and developed and effective and elegant as you can make it. So I don't want to take up too much time talking about it. I want to dive right in, but first let me let you know how this is going to work. We're going to spend about 50 more minutes on just sort of an open forum panel discussion. There's no set form. Everybody's going to chime in wherever it's going to be conversational. And then after that, we're going to do the live Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, let me go back to my screen so I can see it too. You will see a Q&A button and a chat button. Chatting is for you guys to sort of chat among yourselves. Lainey is in there with you, and you guys are welcome to talk about whatever you like in there. The Q&A, if you have a question you want to present to the panelists, that's where you can put that. If you see a question that you particularly like and you want to make sure it gets addressed, you can upvote it. I think Lainey said there was a button for that. And then that'll let us know that more people want to have that answered. Some of you were also kind enough to send in some questions ahead of time, and I've got those on the list, but I have so many questions on my list that we're never going to get to. So again, if we don't get to everything, upvote the ones that you really want to hear answered, and you can contact the panelists again later. And then at the end, we're going to do a prize giveaway. There are 3 books that our panelists are offering. If you're within the US, you have your choice between digital and hard copy, outside the US, digital. And then Catherine Kraft is also offering I believe 1 hour consultation, but I will read that at the end so you know exactly what. So let me read everyone's bios really quick and then let you talk to them, because this is just a whole bunch of expertise on this panel. Sasha Black, Sasha, hello, is a competition winning and best-selling author, Rebel podcaster. She's the host of the Rebel Author podcast, professional speaker, and a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors, which I'm assuming is pronounced Ally, Sasha. Her writing craft books, 13 Steps to Evil, 10 Steps to Hero, and The Anatomy of Prose, the last one is in the prize pack, are all best-selling books for writers. Sasha runs 2 podcasts, the Rebel Author podcast and Next Level Authors, as well as hosting the monthly fiction and nonfiction podcast for Ally. Sasha spent many years developmental editing, but now focuses on sharing her knowledge through writing more craft books, creating writing courses, and consulting on all aspects of writing, marketing, and the publishing journey as an indie author. She lives in Cambridgeshire, England, with her wife and son. I know I mispronounced that. Catherine Kraft, say hi, Catherine, is the award-winning author of 2 novels, The Art of Falling and The Far End of Happy, as well as chapters in Author in Progress and the Complete Handbook of Novel Writing from Writer's Digest Books. Excuse me. Catherine has been a freelance developmental editor at writingpartner.com for 14 years, writing-partner.com. She leads writing workshops and retreats, mentors novelists through her Your Novel Year program, which we'll have information about, teaches for Drexel University's MFA program, and is a regular contributor to top writing blog Writer Unboxed. Faith Black Ross, Faith, identify yourself, began her publishing career at Cambridge University Press after receiving her BA from Williams College, her MA from Rutgers University, and studying at Oxford University. This underqualified panel we have put together. From Cambridge, she moved to Avalon Books, where she became head of the editorial department, overseeing a mix of mysteries, romances, and historical fiction. Faith then joined the editorial department of Berkeley Publishing Group, Penguin Random House, publishing mysteries and historical fiction and working with best-selling and award-winning authors, including Agatha Award winners and Edgar nominees. Faith worked as an acquiring editor for Severn House in the UK before joining Crooked Lane Books in 2016, where she is currently the senior editor. Chris Spizak wrote her first book, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, 250 writing and editing reminders for the curious or confused, with a goal of helping writers of all kinds sharpen their craft and empower their communications. Her Words You Should Know podcast and Grammartopia events follow the same mission, as does her second book, the Novel Editing Workbook, which is part of the prize pack, 105 Tricks and Tips for Revising Your Fiction Manuscript. A former college writing instructor, having taught at institutions including the University of Richmond and Virginia Commonwealth University, Chris is now an active speaker, workshop leader, and fiction editor. She is the board chair of James River Writers and is a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors, the Virginia Writers Club, and the Women's Fiction Writers Association. I am Tiffany Yates Martin. I'm the founder of Fox Print Editorial and a career editor. I started in 1992, working with most of the big 6 at the time, now 5, soon to be 4, as a copy editor. And then I moved into developmental editing about 12 years ago, where I work directly with major publishers as well as directly with authors, everyone from New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal bestsellers to newer authors and indie authors. I lead workshops and seminars. I've got a series of online courses. I contribute to Writer Unboxed, Writers in the Storm, member of Women's Fiction Writers, and also under a pen name, Phoebe Fox. I am the author of 5 published novels, 6 one more coming out next year. The most recent ones through Berkeley Penguin. And then Lainey Cameron, hello Lainey, is kind enough to be our tech maven today. She is an author I was lucky enough to work with on her debut, The Exit Strategy. She's the author of women's fiction and I'm reading this as a quote, recovering tech industry marketing executive. Her award-winning novel, The Exit Strategy, was a #1 Amazon bestseller and has been called a rallying call for women to believe in themselves and join together. And here we are. A digital nomad, meaning she picks locations around the world to live and write for months at a time. Lainey is an avid Instagrammer and loves to support and share marketing insights and tips with other authors. Thank you all for being here. We took so much time introducing because you're all so stinking qualified. So thank you for being here. I'm just going to dive right in. First of all, whether you attendees, thank you for being here. Whether you participated in Nano or not, whether you won or not, I hope you see it as a win if you even participated, if you wrote at all, whether you even did Nano, anytime you write, it's a win. So wherever you are in the process, you've got your completed manuscript. Panelists, now what?
Throw up the confetti and even if it's shaped like commas flying all around you. Seriously, how many people think of writing a book and dream of writing a book? And how many of you out there just freaking did it? I mean, no matter where you are in your editing process, you just wrote a book. No matter what it looks like right now, you wrote a book. That is huge. Step 1, celebration.
Great.
Okay, I'll jump in now, because the next thing you want to do is make sure you haven't just amassed enough black marks to make a book. You want to make sure you told a story. And for that, I think the best next step, once your hangover is behind you, is to think about what you just did. What kind of story did you tell? I suggest fresh writing then, just saying, what is it? What kind of story is it? Is it the story of a woman who, is it the story of the child who, and started out one way and ended up another way, and just sort of get a grip on the bare bones of the story. Another way to think of this is, as your reader approaches page 1 and gets into the main character's dilemma, what is the question you want to remain in the reader's mind throughout the length of the story? That's how they're going to assess story movement. So it's good to think about what question you raised, because that is the question that you need to address that will define the ending of your book. So before you get into the weeds with all the words you've just amassed, I think it's good to step back and just think, what's this a story about?
That's great advice. Anybody have anything to add to that, Sasha?
So I'll add something. I think there are two types of writer. There are writers who need thinking time, and there are writers who don't need thinking time. And there's no right answer. You can be one or the other. The Gallup strengths, I don't know if anybody's heard of those, but they will call it intellection. And it's just the amount of time that you need to think. So there is, I find when I talk to writers, there's always a debate. Should I put the manuscript down for a while? Should I wait? Should I start editing straight away? And a lot of people get very worked up. They hear that you must do this or you must do that. There is no right or wrong way to do this. So work out which one of those feels right to you and then do that. The second thing, and this is something that I do, and this is horrible. I am an evil person about to tell you this, but everybody, regardless of whether you need thinking time or you don't need thinking time, should do this. You need to read your book from start to finish, and you are not allowed to edit a single word, not a comma, not a capital letter, nothing. And during this read through, oh, I'm already damaging my technology. During this read through, you need to take copious amounts of notes about the things that you want to fix. I recommend you focus mostly on the high level stuff. So the story arc, the characters. Don't necessarily take notes about inline things unless it's like you've consistently misspelled a character name or something. You want to take the big story notes. And something that I have learned the hard way is to always put them under chapter titles, so you know which chapter or which subplot or whatever you are referring to. So that's where I personally start.
So you're advocating notes separate from the manuscript?
I do, yeah. I mean, you can put notes in the manuscript, but I think when you do that, the temptation is to start editing. So I have a separate document so that I am incapable of, fiddling. I often export it onto my Kindle as well, so I literally cannot edit. Otherwise, the temptation is strong.
I love that you all said some version of this, because I could not agree with it more. I think that one of the biggest mistakes authors often make is to finish writing and then you start at the beginning and you immediately start editing, revising, I guess I should say. And you've skipped the editing process. That's one of the reasons that I separated out, because I feel like the editing that we're all talking about is the part where you go through and you assess what you actually have, which you have to see as a whole. I always say, if the fewer sessions you can read it in, the better. Sasha, I love that you say you put it on a Kindle, because I also think it gives you a little bit of objective distance not to read it in the same format in which you wrote it, because the objectivity is key. Faith, you didn't weigh in on this, or I know you also work not only with the with the authors that you work with in your publishing house, but I know you do developmental editing. Can you talk a little bit about how you recommend they approach it?
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar to Sasha. Obviously, everyone does things differently. We all edit differently, the same way that you all write differently and you all approach your revisions differently. And So yeah, whether you put it down for 3 months or 3 days or 3 hours before you go back to it, I definitely recommend looking at the whole thing, like Catherine and Zasha said, and really looking at the big picture and what you want it to be and what you think it needs to get there, before you worry about any of the little line edits. It's so tempting. I do it myself. Sasha's exactly right. Putting it on an iPad or a Kindle or something where you can't touch it is perfect, because you will want to touch it. You will see the misspellings and you will want to do that. But then if you start getting bogged down in all of that, you can't see the forest for the trees. And right now, the first thing you really need to focus on is the forest. Leave the
Yeah.
trees alone for now.
We've all been using some terms that I think it would be a good idea to kind of maybe clarify a little bit. And Chris, you had said that you had a lot to say about different types of edit. We've talked about going in for the editing and revising and the line edit, and those can be confusing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. And I love that you're stopping to pause on this, because everybody has this idea of editing. I need to go edit my book now, but what does that even mean, right? So I always like to break things down into kind of 3 levels. And depending on whether you're kind of self-editing or working with an editor, you might hear a bunch of different terms. So in my opinion, I like to break it down into the macro editing, which is the big picture editing, looking at that question that Catherine said, what's the problem of your story? What is your character up against? Looking kind of your bigger structure, all of the big things. This is where we're talking about that developmental edit. This is where we're talking about that story edit, some might call it. Looking at all of these big pieces after you kind of pour all of the sand into the sandbox. So you have all the pieces there. That first edit is where you start to kind of build the mounds and make sure all the mounds are in the right place. And the moat is in a place where the waves will go from the ocean to actually work your moat with this castle that you're building. These are the big structural pieces. And after you get through
Like
that,
what, Chris? Can you talk a little bit about what those big structural pieces are specifically?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So in this developmental, this is where you're making sure, again, you're have that problem that exists in your story, and that through the course of your story, you're not suddenly having this tangent where this sniper shows up and he's a really interesting sniper. So we're going to wander this story over here to chase this sniper. We're making sure your entire story stays on point with whatever this problem is, this larger scope plot issue. This is where you're making sure that your character, your protagonist, has agency. And when I say agency, this is not having a literary agent, although wouldn't that be amazing if all of our characters had agency that could give us and publish our books? I mean, having agency as in they aren't just reacting to the story. Things aren't just happening to them again and again and again, and they're this passive creature that's always dealing with something. They have to make choices, whether they're good choices or bad choices. All of these big questions are part of that developmental, that macro edit piece. And it's not until you get through all of those big pieces that you can start doing the fine tuning. You have your castle in place, and that's where you start getting to like carve out your steps and get your little designs and your beautiful sand castle. And this is where you're getting down a little bit deeper. Maybe you're calling it a copy edit, where you're getting a little bit more into the sentence level stuff. But then the line edit is even a degree past that. You have stages of editing, and you really need to take the time to do every single piece. So many times, I think, Tiffany, you already said it, people finish and then they rush to chapter 1, sentence 1, and they're looking at your commas. That's not where we start the editing process. You have to look at the big picture first and then funnel it down from there.
And not the prose either. I think it's really sexy to start with the prose, but I always say that that's kind of like, it would be like in an HGTV show to start with the staging. First, you got to make sure the house is solid and built, and you've got the foundation and you've got the drywall in and the windows are all hung. And then once you've got that done, you can paint and hang up the curtains and put out the bowl of apples. But the temptation is really strong because it's quick, satisfying stuff. I advocate what my editing idol Saul Stein calls the triage method, which is after you've done that objective read that we're all talking about, where you're not going in and you're changing, you're literally taking in your own story. Then you take what Chris was just discussing, those big foundational parts of your story, and you start with those. It sounds really counterintuitive. You're not going to work chronologically in the way that I advocate. And again, I love, Sasha, that you said there's no right answers and no rules. Whatever works for you. I find this to be really effective. because every time you go back and reread your story, you're going to lose freshness on it. So if you start with the big stuff, and by that I'm talking about the things Chris mentioned, and I also mean your foundational story elements like your character, motivations, the goals. Are there arcs evident? Do we see the plot clearly? Are the stakes clear? Make sure the big stuff is in place, and then you can sort of circle in, which is how I work with authors most of the time, particularly with publishers. We do at least 3 editing passes, and that's so that we can do that. So we start with the big stuff and we circle into the littler stuff. Faith, did you have something? Cool. You look very informed at all times, so I wanted to make sure I got to talk to you. So you do this
Agreeing with everything that you say as usual. That's all.
You do this first read, and then you get your list of things that you think may or may not be working. But one of the questions that I got a lot from people who were kind enough to send advanced questions was, how do you know? How can you tell? We're not objective about our own work. Do you guys have any tips or techniques that you can use to be able to see your work more clearly and figure out where it may not be as effective on the page as it is in your head? And Catherine.
I was just doing this with one of my MFA students. A fun kind of exercise is to take, say, 5 to 7 of your major plot points and just put them in a list. The purpose of plot, and sometimes we forget about this, the purpose of plot is to apply pressure on the characters so that they will change. So you've got the external story, which is the plot points, and then you have the internal story, which is the real story. The plot points can sometimes be just about anything that's going to apply this pressure for your.
Can I stop you for 1 second? I'm loving what you're saying, but can you define a little bit more clearly, apply pressure to your characters so that they can change? What exactly do you mean by pressure in that case?
Okay.
And what do you mean by change?
Okay. Backing up. Usually story movement is dependent on character change. Your reader comes to your story looking for that change because they know it's damn hard. If you could just be Jewish today and decide, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to be Catholic, and just wake up and be Catholic, life would be a lot easier. You know, you could put an end to all sorts of anti-Semitic behavior. We could just all wake up tomorrow and be Catholic. But change isn't easy like that. Change is really hard. Why would someone want to start out being Jewish one day and become Catholic? All of that backstory motivation is really important, and they bring that to page 1 of the book. So now they're going to undergo an arc of change, which is the story. And it isn't going to be easy. These pressures will have to come to bear on the character so that the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. I'll say it again, because we all know that change is painful, and the reader, what they want is to learn from your character's pain in the comfort of their easy chair.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you want to make sure your characters have something that forces them onto this difficult road.
Yes.
Okay.
All other paths have narrowed away. They must move forward through the fire, so to speak. And so if you take, say, 5 to 7 of these major external plot points, here's where she gets to the end of the road and she thought she could go through, but now she has to turn left or right. What decision is she going to make? That might be a big plot juncture. That may be one of them, and etc. So if you take those and then in a list on the other side, show the interchange that each of those made. So let's say she has to turn left or right, and her interchange was, I always thought I could be a ballerina. Now I can't walk. I'm going to have to turn left or right. That's a huge moment of identity change. I am
Or a
never,
choice point, as like, I think some people call it a turning point moment, a choice point moment. Yeah. Is that what you're talking about basically?
so if you look down at the, after you do this, and if you take away all the external plot points and just read down the inner arc, all of those should align. This should lead to this, should lead to this, should lead to this, to this, and those should, those points of change should be along a continuum. So it shouldn't be here where she learns that she's never going to be able to keep dogs because she's allergic. And the next one is, and here's where she learns she's never going to be able to dance again. And here's where she learns that she can't marry Peter because he has another, none of those are like 3 different stories going on.
Mhm.
You want to make sure the inner arc of change is along one story of change. And I think, I can't even remember what the question was now.
Just practical tips for being able to spot the areas in your manuscript that
Yes.
might need revision.
So if
How do
one
you
of
see
those-
that? So this is a
if
tool
one of-
that you, go ahead.
Yeah, so if one of those is way off in left field, oh, here's where she learned
Cool.
she can't marry Peter. And it was, the question in the reader's mind was never about whether she'd get married, then you've slid off course. And I honor the subconscious so much in the creative process. There may be a great reason you brought Peter into it, and it may not be because she can't marry him. It may be because that is going to apply pressure to the original question and you just slid off track somewhere. So I would reevaluate how you use that plot point. That was
Cool. That sounds like a way to be able to map out the character arc, which sounds helpful. If any of you, as we're offering these tools, if you want to send me a summation of those, I will try to compile those for authors at the end of this so that they can look at each of the things we're suggesting. No pressure. Sasha, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. So I have a couple of things. So the first one is when you go and look and you're doing this read through. So this is some of the things that I look at in my, to write in my notes. So does every single scene in your book have a reason, a purpose for existing? What do I mean by purpose? What is it doing? Is it revealing information? Is it deepening a relationship between 2 characters? Is it ratcheting up the conflict because 2 people are arguing, or maybe there's a miscommunication that's leading to a wrong thought in the protagonist or whatever? So there are lots of different reasons why a scene can exist, but your scene must have a reason. It must have a purpose. It must be one of those things or something else. As long as it is adding to your story, your characters, your conflict, your emotional journey, then it can exist. If it's not doing one of those, you need to bin it, okay? Because there's no point in having that scene. You can be more efficient and more effective by, tweaking some of the other scenes and taking snippets of whatever you're binning. Another one is there a conflict or tension or an emotional change of some variety or another in every single scene? And yes, I do mean every single scene. Like, it's got to be there. That you must start and end the chapters with some kind of different emotional state. And if you are achieving the first thing I mentioned, which is developing a plot point or a character relationship or adding tension or conflict, then you're naturally going to do that anyway. And so I think I'll just leave it there in terms of the bigger picture things. There are obviously techniques for looking at the sentence level stuff, is in terms of how you can spot things. I don't know if we're going, do you want to go that low yet, or?
Yeah, why not? I mean, if you've got some specific tools, I just want to give people ways. I think the hard thing for all of us is that we're filling in the blanks in our head of a story that we know so well. And that's what makes, when people say editing is hard, I think that's what they're talking about, because it's hard. One of you said, I think, Faith, to see the forest for the trees because you're in the forest, and editors or any objective reader is above it. We've got the drone view and we're able to see the whole picture. So yes, I'm just asking any tips you have for being able to spot the things that may need revising in your story.
Okay, so nobody's going to like this answer. I seem to be the evil editor on this panel, giving you all the things that mean hard work. But the first thing you have to do is keep learning. I know this is nobody's really going to want to hear that, but ultimately, if you are not reading craft books and you are not reading fiction and non-fiction books with a critical eye yourself, you're probably not going to be able to then spot critical things in your own work. So it's really important when you read for the love of reading to also keep in your conscious mind that you should be assessing and looking at whatever it is those authors are doing. What literary tools are they using? How many words have they used to create this metaphor? You know, how are they using strong verbs like, you know, instead of saying she hit him, you know, that's like, what the fuck is a hit? Like that's a nothing sentence, you know. Did she punch him in the dick? Because everybody knows what that is, right? That's really specific. Okay, so it's looking at your sentence. So yeah, okay, I'm going to come back to the tips now. So I'll give you two prose tips as well. So the first thing is be specific rather than using words like, oh, she hit him or the sky was blue. Look at specificity. So the more specific the verbs and the more detailed elements you are describing, the more the richer and the more vivid your descriptions are going to be. What, you know, what shade of blue? Why does that blue matter to the character? Why is it they've picked up on that? You know, it's looking at the specificity. And probably the most common thing I see writers doing is filtering, and it's one of my pet hates. So filtering is when the author removes the reader one step from the character. So instead, the example I usually give is, I heard an owl hooting in the trees. Well, your reader doesn't need to read the word heard because hearing is implied in the action of your character hearing. So you can just say an owl hooted in the trees. And so just a few more examples of filtering words. She saw, he felt, I thought. All of these words, you can axe out thousands of words from your manuscript if you like do a search on your manuscript for those. So that's, yeah, I guess the high level stuff, and then a couple of tips for the low level stuff too.
I want to elaborate a little on what you said about critical reading. And I also talk about critical viewing because I think you can equally effectively analyze the stuff that your television shows, movies. I have a whole online course about this. It's different from the way you normally read. Sasha, do you have that book when you and I did our podcast interview that you had? This is how Sasha reads when she is reading for analyzing. So what you're doing, first of all, is you're not just going through and kind of analytically going, how does the author do this? First, you see what the effect is on you. So if there's a place when you're reading, when you're feeling suspense and tension, you know, you're on the edge of your seat, you can't put the book down, you don't want to close the book for the night and you go on to the next chapter and you're binge reading. Or if you don't like a character or you're really invested in a character, whatever the effect of a story is on you is what you're paying attention to. And when you're reading critically, then you go back through and go, how did the author do that? Do you have that book, Sasha?
So here's just a couple of examples. This is how I read every single book I ever read. It doesn't matter if it's fiction, non-fiction, whatever. I obsessively take notes and sticky tab, and yeah, I don't know if you want me to. Sorry, because obviously I couldn't hear when I was searching for the book.
I think it's so much easier to see it on someone else's work, and then when you do come to your own work, you have osmosed this. I mean, this is what editors do. We are trained to start seeing story objectively. And so theoretically, it then becomes easier to work on our own stuff that way too, because you really do just sort of soak these techniques in and you realize that none of these things in effective stories are happening accidentally. They're done very deliberately, and it can really help to analyze how they are done. So when you are looking at your own story after you finished it, you can go through, and the first thing you do before you worry about how to do it, is it on the page? If you are trying to create suspense in your story, suspense is an unanswered question, for example. It's an uncertainty. So you can go through and look at the scene and say, what do I want the reader to be uncertain about in this scene? Where on the page have I specifically shown that, and pinpoint whether it's actually on the page or not. The other thing I want to talk about is, Sasha, you said Scenes need to be essential. And I like all the reasons that you gave. One thing I hear a lot of times, and any of you that want to weigh in on this, authors will frequently justify a scene by saying it establishes something. I know you probably all want to address that. Catherine?
That's an author goal.
What?
It's an author goal. Your scene should be driven by a character goal, not an author goal.
Oh, good.
An author goal is, here, I want to explain that when she was young, blah, blah, blah. Here, I want to give a tour of the property. The only point in having a tour of the property is if a bomb is going to drop and we're going to later see that everything's rearranged, because a property can be toured in scene, in the moment.
As you move the story forward.
Right. Another author goal can be, oh, here are all the philosophical thoughts that I want to illustrate in my story. Well, you can just save us the introduction and go ahead and introduce them. Usually any kind of establishing shot that has, that works in movies, because they have to somehow gain interiority when they have no access to it. But sitting on a bus, sitting in the sun, getting a tan, taking a shower. Usually these very static scenes that we think of starting our books with are simply an excuse for the author to achieve their goal of giving us a tour inside the character's mind. And this is not a riveting way to start. You want to start with action. I did want to just add one little thing to what you were saying before about analyzing books. This is a little tip I figured out a long time ago. It can be more helpful to do that outside the genre that you usually read. Because the genre you usually read works with you, like it pushes all your buttons correctly and everything. But like, let's say I'm not a huge reader of science fiction. I appreciate it, but I don't read it all the time. So outside my genre, I'll see techniques that are drawing me in more easily than women's fiction, which is my genre. I just wanted to drop in that little.
No, that's a good point. Anything that makes you more objective. Faith?
I just want to add to that, seems to go along with what Catherine was saying. The scenes of our main character looking in a mirror or a window or in anything to give us a description of who you're looking at, that is a pet hate of mine. It's like anytime I see a scene where someone's looking in a mirror, I just brace myself for I looked in the mirror and I caressed my curly brown hair and my like 5 foot whatever. I would avoid that.
I think that's a pretty common, from what I hear in the industry, acquiring editors, that's kind of pet peeves all the way around. Yeah.
And it happens a lot. And I understand the impetus behind it, but yeah, that is one of the things that is again, an author goal of like, you want everybody to know what your main character looks like and you want to get that across, but there are better, less obvious, less sort of stereotypical ways to go about that.
And that doesn't mean looking at a window pane or looking at the back of a spoon.
Right.
All reflection.
No reflective surfaces, just no reflective surfaces.
Well, this sort of brings us to a question that I got from several people, which I think is valuable. And we spend, I think, maybe too much time worrying about our opening pages, but it's important because, especially Faith, as an acquiring editor, I know that that's where an author has their best chance to draw you in. And to your point, Sasha and Catherine, you were talking about the establishing stuff, like what the author feels that the reader needs to know to invest in the story. To me, that often starts, it gives a static beginning to a story that is not a strong hook. Can you talk a little bit about what the opening should accomplish and how an author can assess whether or not they're starting their story in the right place and in the right way that launches the story with momentum? Anybody who wants to take it, Chris?
So your story, and really even just that very first page, has a lot that it needs to accomplish. You need to introduce a character and then find a way for your reader to actually attach to that character. That does not mean dumping a whole lot of backstory. That does not show them putting on their slippers and pouring their orange juice and taking their shower. You need to get to something that is motivating them, something that is driving them, something that is irking them. Find a way for them to be actually on the page, a problem that they are faced. Maybe it is a minuscule problem that reflects the greater problem of the book, but you need to find a way for your reader to be introduced with and empathize with your protagonist in that first page. And also within that first page, you need to make sure that you're staying within the confines of the genre that you are writing in. For example, if you are writing a horror book and you have this sweet romance, wonderful thing that maybe it's an awesome page one, but you might be setting up your readers for the wrong genre. So you have to make sure that you're kind of writing within the right headspace of someone who might be picking up that book. And again, you need to be working on where is the narrative drive. From page one, you need to start establishing that pull that is going to kind of hook your reader and start pulling them from page one all the way through the entire story through that last page. So there's a lot to accomplish, but I like to think about that hero's journey concept. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the hero's journey of what is that inciting incident that gets everything rolling, and how can you really expose your protagonist through that inciting incident. That inciting incident shouldn't come on page 50. It shouldn't come 10 pages in after you establish all of the things. You need to start on page one.
But I also, sometimes I see that authors will start on an inciting incident, like, they'll open on a car crash or something.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a gun.
Right, because in my, what I have seen, until we're invested in the characters and care about them to some degree, like I always say, readers don't care what's happening until we care who it's happening to. So I don't know that it's always wise to start on an inciting event. And just to sort of define our terms, I define inciting event as that thing that sets the character off inexorably on the journey that they take in the story. Would we all agree with basically that definition? And that may be, in the one I use all the time is in Gone Girl. We don't start on Amy's disappearance. That happens, I want to say maybe 5% into the story, which is a good 5 to 7% is a really good place for an inciting incident. But first we had to know a little bit about Nick. We had to know a little bit about the marriage. We had to know a little bit about Amy. So we understand who these characters are. And then when Nick comes home and that front door is gaping open, we understand what it means. Faith, as an acquiring editor, you have anything specific to add about sort of what to look to accomplish in your opening pages in your edit?
It's hard to quantify it too heavily, obviously, because every book is different. And, there are those horror stories of editors or agents who are like, oh, if I only read the first 5 pages, and if you can't hook me in the first 5 pages, then I'm not reading it, or if you make a mistake. But, there's no hard and fast rule. But I think it is important that we can see what you're capable of in those early pages. I'd say, in the first chapter or 2, I need to see where this is going. Now, sometimes I also have the benefit of having a synopsis to go along with it. So, I can see the larger picture of where this is going, but I really want to get a sense of, when I'm looking to acquire something, how is the writing overall? What's the strength of the writing, the strength of the character, where the plot is going? Is it getting there quickly enough? As an acquisitions editor, there are certain things I can work around. So, sometimes I've read things where, the first chapter is just sort of muddying the water of getting to that inciting incident. But then, I might read it and say, well, that's an easy fix. We just don't need chapter 1, and everything else is great. So, it's a maddeningly subjective answer that I'm giving you, which is not helpful. But you do have a limited amount of page space to make an impact. So you really do, I like your 5 to 7% estimate. You really want to have, and I do a lot of mysteries too. So we usually say for a mystery, somebody should die. It's not often that you're telling people that you have to kill one of your characters, but someone should probably die in the first 50 pages, or else or something else very exciting and dramatic has to happen. But, we usually say sort of that 30 to 50 page mark is where you have to kill someone off.
One way I like to think of it is that we need to, first of all, have a reason to give a crap about the character. And then we need some sort of a question and some sort of a problem. Would you guys agree that those are kind of good, broad guidelines to, because it's easy to say you have to hook your reader, but what does that actually mean? So to me, it's the question and the problem and the character investment that make us go, well, I wonder what's going to happen, and turn the page. Sasha, you had something to add.
Two quick things.
Falling on now.
So the first one is everybody is told to really focus on, you know, those early pages. And I think a lot of writers forget to really focus on the first line. And it is a huge bugbear of mine when I open a book and the first line is boring as shit. Like, you know, this is the very first thing your readers are going to read. Why not make it a, you know, soccer punch of a first line? So the way I do two things. That the first thing I do, well, now definitely not in my first book, but anyway, what I do now is I collect first sentences. I am a hoarder. I am proud of this fact. So whenever anybody has a fantastic first sentence, I will lift it and put it into my file of brilliant first sentences. And the other thing I do is a mindset around first sentences, and I treat it like a tagline. Okay, it needs to have that kind of punch. A tagline is like people in film will say it's like like a log line. So can you describe the whole film in a sentence? You know, I'm not saying that you need to do that on your first sentence, but it's the mindset of having short, concise, you know, some kind of powerful, maybe it's a juxtaposition, maybe there's conflict in the first sentence, whatever. You need to treat it like a tagline and give your reader absolutely no reason whatsoever to put that book down after the first line. And I agree with everything everybody has said about what's important in the first few pages, the first chapter. The other thing that I think nobody has said is character voice. And I think it is essential that we know who your character is and what do they sound like. Can I hear, and I do mean hear, like in my brain, and okay, some people, you know, read and see pictures, some people hear words, whatever, but can we collectively hear what your protagonist sounds like? So what do I mean by that? You know, can I tell off the first page that they are an angry character? Are they, you know, using angry words? Are they you know, are they a very introspective writer? Do they have thoughts in their head? Are they mostly dialogue? You know, do they prefer to dialogue and speak their narration, or is it in prose? Other things, so like, what is their baseline emotion? I think I said that. You know, can you tell by the word choices that they're making their like socioeconomic status? Are they a professor? They're probably going to use really long words. They're probably going to think deeply about things and describe things with longer sentences than somebody who's a gang member who might use slang. So like, I'm just throwing stuff at you, you know, different ideas for how you can hear your protagonist.
Well, what I like that you're pointing out is that a lot of times, especially with character, I think authors work really hard at developing their characters, and to them, they're really real inside their head. But I think what you're saying is look for where you've put that on the page. How do we know your character is a professor? I like your idea about the, you know, the big words, or we hear something about their background, or the way that they even think about things, their paradigm. The metaphors people use are different. You know, a professor might use academic metaphors or turns of phrase that are common to academia that another person might not use, that are really subtle ways of putting that on the page and giving that character voice, because voice isn't just their dialogue, correct? That's
absolutely.
Well, and something else about putting things on the page, all of that is awesome, Sasha. I just want to like just quote everything that you say.
She has that effect on people.
Something I find happens often with authors that I've worked with is that you have spent a lot of time with your book and with your characters and with all of this. You know these people inside and out. You know who they are and how they talk, and you know all the details of the plot and how everything is unfolding. It doesn't always make it on the page. And sometimes you don't know that because you just know that this person did this thing, like they got lunch at this place, and that's going to be important later. And you know that because you saw them do it in your head, but it doesn't make it on the page. So anything that's really important, that's really crucial for their voice, for their character, for their development, for your plot development, when you go back and do that revision, make sure that everything is on the page that needs to be on the page. There are so many times I've had to go back to authors and say, I don't understand why this thing happened. And they're like, oh, yes, it's because of this totally obvious thing that I just knew and forgot to write. Because when you spend so much time doing this, it's easy to forget that not everything that's here in your brain has osmotically transmitted from your fingers onto the page. And so you have to really make sure that everything that needs to be there is there, so that we're not missing any crucial pieces of information or voice or anything like that.
This is such a hard part of editing. And I want to pivot to a couple of questions because it's relevant to this. Before I do that, really quickly, one question we had that's relevant right now. Christina asked to clarify what an acquisitions editor is, the phrase I was using earlier. So I don't know if that's how you'd refer to yourself, Faith, but I did it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I am both. I am both a developmental editor and an acquisitions editor, and I'm a weirdo in that I am both of those things, because I acquire for a publishing house. So you often will just hear those people referred to as editors. In the context in which we are all here today, all of us are editors. I believe I am the only one who is actively acquiring for a house. Everybody else does developmental editing, which is sort of in a more freelance capacity where we work either for a publishing house or for the author directly to help you fine tune the manuscript. So I wear two hats, but basically an acquisitions editor does the same thing a developmental editor does, but in-house for the publisher. So as an acquisitions editor, I read submissions that come in from agents or sometimes from authors, decide whether or not we should acquire it for the publishing house. And then once we have acquired it, I also developmental edit it. Not all acquisitions editors do their own developmental editing. It sort of depends. My favorite part of what I do is the developmental editing, so they can try and take that part of my job for me over my cold dead body. They tried, they suggested once, they're like, hey, if you stopped doing the editing and just did the acquisitions, you would have more time to read submissions. And I said, no.
And I would have to do it somewhere else because I'd be leaving you. Okay, so back to feedback, which I think can be a very valuable tool for authors to be able to see some of the stuff that we may be blind to in our own work. When should authors seek feedback? How should they seek feedback? And then how do you know what to do with that feedback? That's a lot of questions in one question. So please attack any part of that you wish. Chris Spisak. I'm like Charlie Brown's teacher, except I use words.
Wah, 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 wah. You're much more eloquent. So one thing that I always remind people is that while we have many friends and loved ones in our lives, not all of these people are our best readers for our early manuscripts, because maybe your mom or your spouse will just kind of say, that was really good. Maybe they'll say how terrible it was. Who knows what your relationships are? But you need to find someone who is reading like a writer or reading like an editor, not someone who will just say, huh, that was interesting. Because I mean, they went through your book, and how much feedback are you getting from that was really good? You want to make sure you're having someone read who can actually help your process to have those questions of, is this character working? Are these situations working? Where were you bored? Where were you fascinated? Where did you feel like you were left hanging? All of these questions about how effective a book is. You want to make sure someone who can address all of those. Other writers in your writing community, especially people who are writing within your same genre or people who are heavy readers in your genre where you're writing, can give you a lot of really good feedback. Obviously, editors are here too, and I'll let somebody start talking now.
I think that depending on what, in terms of when to bring a reader in, I think it depends on why you want someone to read it. If you are stuck and can't move forward, or if you have finished writing the entire novel and it's 40,000 words, or if it's 150,000 words and you find a really bored person who's willing to read all of that, it depends. Okay, so if you need feedback on what belongs in the story, what doesn't, what because you just can't see that, or if it's not robust enough and you're trying to figure out a way to beef it up. Those are reasons to bring someone in early. But personally, since I'm an author and an editor, I really don't like doing a developmental edit on anything that hasn't seen at least 3 drafts, because I don't know what my own story is. At least maybe after the second draft, I'm starting to get a really strong sense of it. But I'm one of those layer writers, I just don't, it just doesn't spring fully formed from my mind on the first draft. I would never show someone my first draft writing, because I'm going to, as a developmental editor, I'm going to come at it with the full scope of what I've learned about writing, because you're paying a lot. And so I'm going to use all those big guns aiming at your little first draft. And that's not fair for anyone's first draft. So
well, and I don't think first drafts are ready to be edited often, in my opinion. For example, when I work with publishers, if you think about those of you who have submitted or are submitting, if you think about how much you are revising your story before you even start submitting to agents, and then your agent will submit it to a publisher. And then and maybe your publisher asks for more revisions. And so now you feel like if you've done any on your own, you're probably at least 3, 4, 5, 10 revisions into this. When I get brought on by a publisher, we're then going to do 3 more. So it's normal. Catherine, I think you said something earlier, or Sasha, you did. You hate talking about how difficult editing is. Editing, and since Sasha already broke the cursing hymen, I'm going to go there, is fucking hard. It is the hardest part of writing, revising, I should say, editing and revising. However, it is where you find the story, as you were saying, Catherine. And I think it's a perfectly normal part of the process. One of the things I like to liken it to is I used to be an actor, and we would rehearse a show that we were going to put on, even a show we were putting on for 2 weekends. We would rehearse easily 5, 6 weeks, every single day except one. And that is not considered wasted time. It's not considered, oh my God, why can't we get this right? It is part of the process, as is editing and revising. It's the most important part of the process. So if you have just finished your nano manuscript, one of the reasons I wanted to present all these ideas that you can use on your own is that there is so much you can do on your own to get to, as you said, Catherine, the story you are trying to tell, the truest version of your vision, so that when you do, if you do decide to work with a professional editor or to get outside feedback from your beta readers or your crit partners, it's as solid as you're capable of making it. It's as complete and deep as you're capable of making it, so that when you get that feedback, it's more useful to you. Sasha, did I see you put up your sweet little British hand? Okay. So yeah, I think it's really valuable to know when to seek it out. And I do think it comes in stages. For example, I think it's helpful to have readers and crit partners before you get a professional edit, if you decide to, or before you go to your editor, because that gives you information. One thing that we haven't addressed yet that I think all of you would agree with me, and feel free not to, is that it's that Neil Gaiman quote that when people tell you what's not working in your manuscript, they're probably right. But if they tell you how to fix it, they're probably wrong. I always say, except for editors. But even an editor, I don't know your story. You know your story. So you're the truest arbiter of what's right for your story. But if you are hearing from a variety of readers, and I like that you talk about using, Chris, I think you mentioned using experienced writers who can give you information in the terms in which it will be useful to you. But I also think you can use experienced readers and guide them to what you need to know with like a questionnaire. Was there any point at which you got bored in the story, for example, is a question that anyone can answer, whether they're a writer or not. Did you like the characters? Was there any point at which you didn't find something believable? Those are very general questions that an experienced reader can give you valuable information. But what you do with that information, how you fix that, is up to you. That may tell you, oh, I don't have suspense and tension. Oh, my characters are not well developed. Oh, they're not relatable. But it's up to you to figure out how to do that.
And then we had a question in the questions for Catherine here. People are a little confused on what you mean by a layered writer. Can you say a few more things about what that means to be a layered writer?
Well, I just meant that I write in layers. So there may be a bare bones plot sort of thing that starts. Oh, am I unmuted? Yeah, yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I had muted because there was sirens going past. I didn't want our emergency here in Doylestown to pervade the entire event. Yeah, so I may, okay. I may have the protagonist's arc of change laid down in my first draft, but every time your character changes, all of her relationships will change as well. So now, and we know this, if you've ever tried to go on a diet and someone in your house is sabotaging it, they don't want you to change. But if you are determined to change because the stakes are high and you must change, your relationships will change too. They must come to respect this new aspect or this new desire of yours. So I don't always get all that in my first draft. So I may start to interweave relationship arcs in a second half. I may think of a cool symbol that I want to also have an arc. You know, like in my current manuscript, I have a clock that is wickedly misbehaves in these kind of fun ways. So it behaves one way in the beginning, it behaves another way mid novel, and it acts another way at the end. And so a symbol can have an arc. Your relationship to an activity. I edited a manuscript, and the writer didn't even see that her character had a relationship with boats that changed throughout. She didn't realize how many different kinds of boats she had put in her manuscript, and how beautifully her relationship with these various boats showed the stakes getting more dire throughout the manuscript, and then making peace with it at the end. And that was a really cool thing. So I tend to kind of layer in that way. And what I wanted to say to your point, Tiffany, was that from the perspective of the editor, if you bring your story to us and you aren't even sure really what it is yet, we can only go so far. And it can be frustrating from our perspective. It's like, okay, well, I'm not really sure where you were going with this story because it kind of wobbles through here, but if you decided it was this kind of story, here's something you might do. And I try to leave at least a little trail of breadcrumbs that you can follow, that you may not choose the direction that I'm going in. And therefore, when you read my evaluation, you might feel like it's, oh, she's trying to change my story. No, I'm just trying to find the story and show you how to develop a through line. If what you meant to do is tell a different one, then follow my breadcrumbs and you too can figure out how to make that through line. So you see, like if it's a very wobbly story, we can only take our best guess. If you have put in the multiple drafts and found the story you really want to tell, it may still need help in its execution, but we have a much better way to support your vision. You need to have your vision before we can support it.
I always say it's more bang for your buck. Yeah. Editing is not cheap. Editing is really not, like, professional editing is not cheap, and you want to give yourself the most bang for your buck. And so by getting a really clear vision of your story, getting whatever feedback you can get, making the revisions you can make on your own before you get this professional objective eye, that gives you the most bang for your buck. The biggest chance of having a finished submission or publishing ready manuscript at the end. I want to smoothly segue into the live Q&A because we have some pertinent questions here that are about some of the stuff we've been talking about. Before I do that, did anybody have anything to add? I don't want to cut anyone off or curtail your wisdom in any way. Okay, so we got this question a lot about cutting, how to know what to trim. I got some advanced questions from Mo Flannery. I would be interested in advice from the panelists on critical thinking when it comes to cutting out sections of work. I have a hard time deleting anything that I have written. Maria Oglesby says her biggest editing challenge is overwriting. She tends to way overwrite, and even when I have things pared down to essential characters and plot, I feel like I go in with the intention of cutting and combining, and I somehow end up adding a lot too. And then we have someone who said that they have, hang on, I can't find the name right off the top of my head. They have, does the 201,000 words in the manuscript and just not sure what's essential, what needs to be cut. I know, Sasha, you touched on this earlier. Can you guys give some advice for assessing how to trim? Killing darlings, partly.
Well, first I would say that this is it's putting your big girl panties on. That's really the best way I can think of it. It just doesn't matter if you have a section in your book that doesn't further the story movement, like Sasha was saying, that has no emotional turning point within it, that's pushing this character along her emotional journey, then just get rid of it. I mean, I am so cold-hearted when it comes to cutting my own work, because here's the thing, don't pine the fact that this beautiful writing is lost because you have like 80,000 other words in there that are so great, and your reader never saw the ones that you're cutting. So they're not going to miss them. And you certainly don't want them wading through them trying to find your story. So if they don't belong there, just get rid of them. And if you can't hit delete, which most people can't, you keep an outtakes file and drop it in there.
I'm actually a big fan. I call it the discard file, and I'm a huge fan of it for the reason you say, peace of mind. It's a lot easier to cut something if you don't think it's gone forever. You're basically just fucking with yourself, but it helps. It's like a mental trick that tricks you into being able to let go of your own precious words. And also, sometimes you actually will go back and harvest some of that. And so it's nice to know it's there if you need it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll go one step further and just say, if you, I mean, this is particularly true for indie authors, but I mean, traditional authors can do this as well. If you have a mailing list where you have, and you should have a mailing list, let me just add, regardless of whether you're trad or indie, you want to be collecting the email addresses of people who are enjoying your books and your work and interested in what's coming next. You can utilize those deleted or cut words and, you know, curate short stories, or you can have deleted scenes or outtakes, and you can use them in, you know, as a sort of a freebie incentive to entice readers onto your mailing list. And so nothing that ever has to be wasted. If
it's like the deleted scenes in a DVD. You know, if you love the film, those are fun to watch. If you love the book, you like seeing what didn't make it into the book.
And one thing I want to add is, as writers, we don't always give our readers credit for what they can get. Readers are kind of like detectives, and it's different from someone who's watching a movie or someone who's dealing with media that we get exposed to at all times these days. Readers are detectives. They love picking up on the subtleties and going along on the journey with the characters as it's happening. When your protagonist or any of your characters stop and ask questions and think, sometimes it's your job as the writer to get your reader to think these questions, to get all of these things to be going on in their head, not to stop and have your narrator tell the reader what they need to be questioning at this time, not to show a clue and then expound upon, wait a second, was that a clue for a page? Put the clue there and give your readers credit that they are smart people and they are going on this journey with them, figuring out things as they go. Save those things. I have a big file of drafts. So I have drafts by date when I have all of major cuts. So that way I keep it all, but then just tighten, say, how much of this do I actually need? Anytime I have a character thinking about things for too long, I recommend writers thinking about, do you need to have your character thinking on the page so much? Because that thinking is what you want your reader to do, not your character.
It's what makes, I think, readers really engage in a story. It makes us a part of the story. And it's why I think books are so magical, because as you said, more so than a movie or television show where we're just a passive recipient, the reader is an active part of the experience of the story. And you give us these puzzle pieces that we have the pleasure of putting together.
And that's why
Right.
authors are awesome.
Yeah.
So I have another quick one just
Yeah.
to add. So we've been talking about how it's really hard to get objectivity on our manuscripts, and the more granular you get on the page, the harder the objectivity is. One of my pet hates as an editor is repetition. Also a pet hate as a reader. So I highly recommend a word frequency checker. So literally dump your manuscript in there's loads of free ones online. You can do, I think it used to be like a word cloud or a word or whatever, but that, you know, like the core frequency checker. In fact, I think even Scrivener has one of these. Innate Scrivener is a piece of writing software for anybody who doesn't know. But you would be gobsmacked at how much we repeat ourselves. And you can get online some, if you just type in like crutch list, like author crutch list or something, you will find dozens and dozens of lists online of words that we repeat frequently. So things like look, eyes, hand, feel, so, but, then, just. Like I have genuinely edited manuscripts where like I've seen 687 justs, you know, in a manuscript. You can delete most of those justs, guys. Like it's okay.
Actually,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
well, yeah.
Yeah, so doing a word frequency checker is a really, really good way to hack out quite literally thousands of words. In fact, my friend will remain nameless, but my friend just did this and hacked out 5,000 words from their manuscript. Yeah.
Wow.
And she is a clean writer as well. So, you know, you would be astonished. And it does slip through as well. That's what I was going to say. So I recently read a very, very famous book that's recently come out, and another thing that to be aware of, the more unusual the word, the the fewer times you can use it. So there was one particular word that was a very long word and kind of was a metaphor for the book, but it was used 9 times because I started counting because I am that petty. And it was used 9 times in the book. And I was just like, come on, like you are an author and this has come from one of the big 5. Like, what are you doing?
Well,
so,
it draws
yeah,
attention to itself. It pulls you out of the story.
Exactly. And so the more unusual the word, the fewer times you can use it. And I would say if it is an unusual word, use it once, use it effectively, don't use it again, because you are a writer. It is your job to write, pretty sentences. You can think of new ways to say stuff, guys. Like, so yeah.
Well, and there's more insidious repetition too. A lot of times I'll see authors show something and tell something where one or the other would do. Show is often stronger, or they'll restate something the same way or a different way, but the same idea in like 2 or 3 different ways. And there was an example I used to give from a very famous author I won't identify, who there was a sentence, I think he said something like, there was a bovine acceptance, like cattle waiting to go into a pen. And I'm like, okay, we got bovine from cattle and vice versa. And this was a hugely successful author. Little things like that where you've already established, Chris, I think you said, trust the reader. The reader is really smarter than a lot of authors give them credit for, and you don't need to spoon feed them. And in fact, the less that you do, I mean, it's a fine line, because if you give us too little, we don't have enough to sink our teeth into. But the less that you spoon feed us, the more we're an active part of the story and the more engaged we become in that.
Not just words too, but phrases. I've had authors like whole phrases or lines of dialogue repeated chapter by chapter, and it's just a find and replace will be your best friend to trim some of that out. And sort of related, but only that this is one of my favorite tips that I often give my authors, is that with dialogue, it sounds stupid and you're not going to want to do it. So I'll put myself in Sasha's mean editor camp. But you have to sit and read your dialogue out loud, because it's not the same. It's not the same reading it on the page. Things written on a page sound different than the way we speak to one another. And you'll find, and it will look completely normal. And then you read it out loud and you think, I would never say that to someone. It just doesn't sound natural. And I always tell my authors this, and they always are like, oh, don't want, like, I'm not rehearsing Shakespeare, but like, you have to read it out loud.
And narrative dialogue is not real life dialogue. Real life dialogue is messy. It has circumlocutions. We've got lots of ums and hesitations and repetition. Narrative dialogue is much pithier, to the point, but yes, still has to sound natural. We have such great questions. I want to try to get to them. Here's one that got really upvoted. And in fact, I also got some advanced questions on this, which is, how do you know when it's finished? Catherine.
I addressed this already, but a pet peeve of mine, and actually I am an executor of my pet peeve, which is writing beyond the end of the book. You have reached the end when that question that was in your reader's mind from the beginning has been addressed. I read this mystery one time, and it was so clear that the person who wrote the manuscript had written too short of a book. And so she had another person be killed and tried to make it, oh, it's a serial killer. Well, we never had a question in our mind that it might be a serial killer. There was no indication of it. So it's just another book tacked onto the first one. She had addressed the story question, and we reached the end. And I think one reason we write beyond the end of the book is because at that point, there's no more trials and tribulations. You get to see the person in their happy place where they've changed, they've adapted to change. They now and we've been so hard on them, and it's just so nice to see them happy now. But really, those are all of the things that the reader can probably intuit on their own, because there are no more major challenges. Those have ended. And a fun book club question, one of my favorite book club questions, is 5 years down the road, where do you see these characters? There should be some room for discussing that. And if you've written beyond the end of the book and tied everything up into a neat knot, there is going to be no discussion on that matter.
Well, and the basis of fiction is problem resolution. We need to have those uncertainties. We need to see those challenges and obstacles. And once they are all met, the story really, once the main one is met, that's your climax, the story is over. And so we talked earlier about the inciting incident should be within like the first 5 to 7%. One of my favorite, I think I have the chart right here, Michael Haig, he writes about screenwriting, but he's brilliant. You probably can't see this, but he has this little chart where he says things should happen. I do not like hard and fast rules, but I really like this as a guideline. He says that once you have resolved basically the characters, the major climax, then everything that follows, your denouement, the resolution, the happily ever after, should be like about 1% of what's left. Like literally you have finished, the story is over. So just give us that little glimpse of, the hero's journey talks about bringing the elixir back. So all we need is that little hint of how this character is changed by that. And then the story is over. But beyond like, when is the story finished? How do you know when the editing is finished? That's a tough one, because I think especially as artists, I mean, I know all of us who write, you could probably pick up anything you've ever written and start tweaking it right now, even if it's been published. And part of that is because we become better writers. We grow and evolve, and you see different things, but it's also a very subjective business, as all of us will tell you. And each of us may seek, Faith and I have done editorial throwdown presentations at conferences where we each edit the exact same piece of writing, and you see where you might get the same comments over and over, which are, that Neil Gaiman quote we talked about, things that you might need to shore up, and where there are subjective differences that are up to you as the author to consider. But even from day to day, an author may see, or an editor may see something differently. You may see something differently in your work, and you could tweak it forever and never let it go. How do you know when to let it go?
So there's that wonderful Da Vinci quote of art is never finished, only abandoned. And I feel like we all have that moment of, okay, when do we abandon it? And one thing I always want to tell people, whether you're pitching, whether you're indie publishing, whatever your route may be, if you have that little niggling feeling in the back of your mind of, okay, I think I'm there and I think I'm getting away with that one piece. If you still have that little part of you saying, well, I think I'm getting away with that, it's not yet there. Finish it until you know you're not getting away with that muddle in the middle or whatever it happens to be. Make sure you completely finish all the steps and make sure you feel good about all those steps. Don't feel like I'm pulling it off. I think I can get away with this. Don't pitch yet if that's where your mind is.
That's a good perspective.
I've heard one agent call that flinch-proof manuscript. If you're flinching at anything you've done, then you know you're not ready yet. But I also, and sorry, Faith probably hates to hear this, cover your ears, but I think that I think that you can think of submission as part of your education in the journey of your manuscript. So if you have sent out 20 or 30 submissions and you've got absolutely no request for extra pages and no one's even like taking the step of, I just love this, this, and this, but I'm hung up on this. If you're getting no feedback at all, I don't think it's ready for the current marketplace. You could just keep sending it, but I've seen people, you know, like for example, my debut novel, The Art of Falling, I got representation on agent 113. So people hear that and they say, oh, well, I'll just send out to 150 agents tomorrow. It isn't a numbers game, it's a learning game. That 113th actually came in year 8 of the growth of my manuscript, because I was learning to tell a rather complex story for a debut novelist, but you know, you can't control those things. So that was the story I wanted to tell. And so I needed to learn how to tell it right. So all of that was part of my evolution. But I did hear one writing instructor one time talk about the rule of 13. She puts out, actually hers was the rule of 12, but 13 is my lucky number, so I adapted it to 13. I would put out 13 queries at a time, and if I didn't get a nibble on one, I would change something, either the query letter, the manuscript. I'd take another look at it, because now you've had more time away from it and you're going to see it with fresher eyes.
Sasha, you had something to add?
Yes, definitely, because I am not a traditionally published author, and I do this for a full-time living. So yeah, I just wanted to weigh in from the indie author perspective. So I think it depends on what your goal is, because if you're going to write a literary fiction novel, then I completely agree with what Catherine's saying. You know, you probably are better going down the traditional publishing route. But if you write, for example, pulp fiction, if you want to churn out books because you just love story and you've got 50,000 stories in you and you want to put them all into Kindle Unlimited and throw money at advertising, then you're probably going to be done a lot sooner than somebody who is working on a literary novel. And also this is partly to do with like reader expectation as well. So for example, science fiction space opera is very pulp fiction. The readers are there for sarky characters and for pacey story. Do they care about gorgeous descriptions? No, they don't. So, you know, you can write that kind of story quite quickly. It doesn't need to be as polished and beautiful as something that is necessarily going to go down the traditional publishing route. If you want to indie publish and you do want to write the very best quality hang on, I am not saying pulp fiction is not quality, because quality is in the eye of the reader. What I'm saying is, if you want to spend a long time perfecting your prose and you know, you spent a long time learning, then in terms of how do you know when you are finished, I see this a bit like a mountain. So you're climbing the very base of this mountain. Have you done all of that character development? Have you done the story arc? Have you hit all of, like, if you're using a 3-act structure, have you hit all of the main plot points? have you got the depth on the page? Have you done all of the things that we've talked about in terms of the scenes, blah, blah, blah. You're climbing up this mountain until you get to the peak. If you are fannying around with commas and changing like the odd word here and there, you're probably done. Like if you don't feel like you can identify anything else, and you have gone to a professional editor and you've had professional feedback and you've done all of their stuff, and you've had, you know, other writers feeding back to you, and you are left fanning around with these odd words, then you're done. Like perfection will kill your business and it will kill your creativity. At some point you're going to have to let go, and done and published is better than absolute perfection, because I do not believe that perfection exists. Like and this is the other thing. So like I cringe every time someone tells me that they're going to go and read my first book, but you know what, it was the best I could do at that point, and that is my marker and my judgment. Is this book the best book I can personally produce at this time? And if that is the case, then it's done, and you have to let go, because your next book, I can assure you, will be better than your previous one. But that doesn't mean that you should then not publish, or you should go back and re-edit. Like just let it go, move on.
I always say it's like the menu at TGI Fridays. You can sit there, or the Cheesecake Factory, you can get lost in it forever and ever, but if you don't at some point make a decision, you're not going to eat. So at some point, let it go, get it out there. We are at time, so I want to do a couple of quick things. There's a lot of questions, unfortunately, that didn't get answered. If anybody wants to stick around and answer some, I'm happy to do that if any of you would like to, but I also want to be respectful of your time. Please feel free to go. You will, if you attended, whether live or you saw the replay, I will be sending a thank you email out, and that will also have contact information, which I also think Lainey is posting. You can contact any of the panelists directly if you have questions. One thing we got a number of upvotes on is specific guidelines. A specific bullet sheet is what Jill Anderson asked for, on like an editing checklist is what I'm assuming you're asking. It's a fantastic question, and I actually can offer some things like that I will happily send out afterward. If any of the panelists would like to send theirs, that would be great too. I want to quickly do the giveaway, and then if each of you would leave us with one nugget of your very best advice about editing or revising, or both, that would be great. Lainey, can you pick a number between 1 and 203? Or not?
157.
157. So I have an email address, but not a name. Maybe I have a name. Erin Gretke. Erin, Groetteke. So Erin, if you're on, are you on? If you are, tell Lainey in the chat. If not, you can email me at Tiffany@Foxprint Editorial. We will get you your prize pack, which is The Anatomy of Story by Sasha Black. Hang on, I'm going to my list. And my intuitive editing back here, and Chris's The Novel Writing Workbook. Catherine Kraft will check the alignment of your novel's most important structures, illuminate any areas of concern, and brainstorm suggestions in a 1-hour story development consultation where you can bring your own questions or concerns. That hour is entirely yours. I cannot thank you all enough. I feel like we could do this for about 6 hours and still not touch on everything we all want to bring up, or anything the authors want to hear. You guys had great questions. Thank you, authors, for joining us. Please stay in touch. Can each of you leave us with whatever one crystallized nugget of advice you could give for everybody as you approach your manuscript? I guess I'll start with mine, which is the real work of writing does lie in editing. The thing that I would say is be kind to yourself. Understand that editing is a normal part of the process. It doesn't mean that there was something wrong with your draft. It doesn't mean you're not a good writer. It doesn't mean you don't have talent. It doesn't mean you couldn't get your story on the page, or that your story is worthless. All it means is you're in rehearsal, and you now have the opportunity in editing and revising to be able to dig out all the gold that is in this gold mine that you created in your writing and the drafting process. So don't judge yourself. Something I always say is that creativity never responds to the stick. It only responds to the carrot. And when you are in editing and revising mode, if that mean critical voice comes in, you're going to shut down your creativity. You're going to shut down your objectivity and hamper your ability to create the strongest story you can. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. What the hell?
Go, Faith.
Do it, girl.
Everything that Tiffany just said. I think some people, when they come to me, whether it's for developmental editing or when they're one of my authors through a publishing house, they're always, some of them are very nervous, and just know that we're people. And we've all been edited and we've all gone through this, and everybody works differently. But for me, my favorite part of what I do is the back and forth with my authors discussing books. I mean, for me, this is really just wish fulfillment, right? Like, I read books for my job. And I mean, look at it this way. It's like if you were reading a book that you bought in the bookstore and you thought, oh God, I really like this book, but I really wish that this happened in this chapter. And I really wish that like these characters got together or like whatever. And then I get to go tell the author like, hey, could you just make these changes and then help them create the best possible book. So that's really all we're trying to do, is help you get your book to be the best it can possibly be. And that's really all that we want. We're not here to be mean or ask you to kill your darlings or, you know, change your voice. I think a lot of people are always concerned, like we're going to come in and rewrite your book and make it our book. And like, if I wanted to write my own book, I would just go write my own book. But that's, you know, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to work with you, or we're all here to work with you to make your book the best that it can be. So don't be scared. It can be a really fun process, or, you know, maybe I'm just delusional, but I think it's fun. So hopefully you all will too.
I do think it's fun. I think it's so fun. And whenever authors just dread editing, I think, oh, but that's the best part. And if that's all you take away from today, that would be so exciting, because it really is just the juiciest part of creating a story. Sorry, I jumped in again. I'm shutting up. Sasha, Catherine, Chris, who's got a nugget?
I'll go next. So you're right. Editing can be so absolutely intimidating, and everyone always says, well, where do I start? And kind of circling back to that idea everyone was talking about, where you're reading through your entire manuscript without making a mark on the page. One of my favorite pieces of advice is to do a read through similar to that, but to give yourself a little cheat sheet or a little key where you think about, okay, here's kind of the 5 major things I need to work on in my story, where I really need to work on character motivations, emotional variance, adding, setting, and you kind of come up with a list of like 5 things or 10 things, whatever your big things are that you know you need to work for. And then to kind of create a trail guide for yourself. So you're reading through your entire manuscript, and maybe every single time you know you need to work on balancing with a little bit of setting here, just putting 2 hashtags. So as you're reading through, you're just adding 2 hashtags every single spot that has this one thing. Every single spot where you know you need to up the suspense, add an asterisk. Use symbols that don't exist elsewhere in your manuscript. So that way you have a cheat sheet, and using the find function, then you can get in a zone and edit in waves. And today you're only going to work on adding emotionality onto the page. So you're just going to go from asterisk to asterisk to asterisk. And that way you can kind of get in the zone, knock out one element of your editing process. And then at the end, if you go through your entire manuscript looking at just that one element, from page 1 to page 352 or whatever you have, then you can actually cross that off your list. And do you know how good it feels to cross something off your editing list? So it's just a cheat sheet way of the editing process, but it can be really helpful and can make you feel very accomplished in this task that can feel so hard sometimes.
That's an awesome tip. I've never heard that. I love it.
My mind is exploding. But I'll go next. But my mind is exploding because just one thing, like that's the thing about editing. There's so many things, you know. But I'm just.
That's the thing. It can be so overwhelming. It helps to kind of crystallize it.
I'm going to give a down and dirty book description: inciting incident, dark moment, climax. Just boil your book down to those 3 things. What happens in your character's life that raises this question that's going to send them off on trying to make their life make sense again, in whatever form that is, that big problem that they're chewing on, and send them straight toward, not straight toward, there'll be a lot of obstacles, but if you can simplify things by thinking that's sending them straight toward the dark moment, which is the opposite of success. Make your dark moment darker than you think it should be, and your book will be more powerful, because I think all the power in the book and what makes it memorable is the distance between the lowest low and the achievement of the goal at the climax. Your character's back is against the wall, everything's against them, all the stakes that you have been promising, hey, if they don't do it, then this is going to happen, and all of those are coming to bear on your character. Push them as low as you possibly can, and then have them say, well, you know what? That's not happening to me, baby. And show them fighting back, because that's when we discover what we're made of. We don't discover what we're made of while we're sitting around in an easy chair. We need to be slammed against the wall and get a concussion and thrown to the floor, and then say, no, not today, and bring them back. And that distance right there is going to make your book memorable. So think in terms of the alignment of those three elements as you before you start to get into the nitpicky stuff.
That's awesome. Sasha, finish us out, baby.
Okay, so Malcolm Gladwell is famed for saying, to become an expert in something, it takes 10,000 hours. But what is missed off, and he does actually say this, it's 10,000 intentional hours of practice. And so I want to reiterate on changing your mindset in terms of how you read. I want you to go away and read like a writer, and to be forensic about your reading. So if you want to learn how to write better dialogue, then go into your genre on Amazon or Kobo or Barnes & Noble or wherever. Go and look at the top 100 best-selling books in that genre. Pick one from the top 10, one from 10 to 20, one from the mid-range, one from the bottom. I think that's 4. I can't add. I'm a writer. I'm not supposed to do numbers anyway. And then go through and intentionally read those books and study the dialogue. Study everything about that dialogue, the length, how it evokes voice, look at the grammar, look at the words and the intonation and the rhythm and the cadence and everything. Then go and do it in a different genre, because you will then pick up tips and tricks of how to use literary tools globally rather than just for your niche genre. I say the both because it's really important that you deliver on your reader expectations in your genre, and also so that you learn, voice and technique and style more holistically. So my final tip, if you want to get better at writing and being able to edit your own work, go and be forensic with your learning.
I actually believe so strongly in that. I created an online course about how to read and watch like a writer so that you can learn how to do that. It's funny, there's that Stephen King quote about writers write and writers read, but nobody teaches writers how to read the way that as an artist you would do, you'd paint the masters to try to emulate them, or even as an athlete, you watch great plays. As an actor, you watch other actors. Nobody teaches us how to do that as a writer. And it is so foundational to learning how not just to write, but really crucially how to edit and revise your own work, which can be the most challenging thing. We are already over time, so I want to be really respectful. The name of the course is How to Read and Watch no, I changed it. It's How to Train Your Editor Brain, which is so much catchier. Panelists, I am in awe of every one of you. The collective experience on this panel is phenomenal. I so appreciate your knowledge, and I so appreciate the fact that in a time when, I don't know if authors know this, there's not a governing body for editing, and all of you are so experienced and knowledgeable and reputable in what you do and are offering so much value. And I cannot thank you enough for taking time to donate to me and to all of these authors to share. Lainey, you are a technical goddess. Because I'm already over, I don't want to ask anybody to stay on longer, but there are some fantastic questions that didn't get addressed. If you would like to send them to any of us, all of us have agreed that we will try to address as many as we can. I personally promise that if you send them to me, I will absolutely address them. And I'll be sending the thank you with all of these. If you didn't get this contact information that Lainey posted for everybody, I'll be sending it again. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough for spending time. I hope that, I forget who said it at the beginning, Chris, whoever said that it's a huge accomplishment to have completed a draft. It's a huge accomplishment to sit and write. Please celebrate that and go forth and edit. Thank you all.
Congratulations, everybody.
Good luck.